These haunting battlefield scenes may well be the most recognisable footage of the First World War. Men huddled in a sunken road, troops waiting to go over the top, a massive mine erupting under enemy trenches, and wounded men being rescued from no man's land. But did you know it was all captured under fire by a single cameraman on a single day? Join us as we follow that one man using his own diary entries, matched precisely with trench maps, modern terrain footage, and the original film he shot. We'll retrace his steps and investigate what he captured on the infamous opening day of the Battle of the Somme. By late June 1916, hundreds of thousands of men had flooded into this area of the Western Front in preparation for the Allied Big Push. And along with them came this man, Geoffrey Malins. A kinematographer, as they were then known, working for the British Army. His job was to document the attack for the general public back home. What he shot was nothing short of incredible, and in fact every piece of historic footage we use in this video was filmed by the man himself at that time. But just where would he position himself for the coming battle? Let's explore. We know that by the 27th of June, Malins and his assistant had arrived just here, outside the village of Beaumont-Hamel, which was in German hands at the time but a major Allied target for the upcoming attack. By exploring this trench map, which painstakingly marks every single trench in the sector and shows the trench names used at the time, we can get a much clearer picture of the area as it looked in 1916. Matching key road junctions and features on the historic map with this satellite image and overlaying one onto the other, then blending the map out but leaving those trench lines on, we get this unique perspective of a long disappeared battlefield. It was here that Malins was heading, and specifically to this spot, Jacob's Ladder, proposed by the local commanding general as an ideal one from which to film the coming battle. To our fortune, Malins also kept a diary at the front, which allows us to track him with incredible detail. He remembered this exchange with a junior officer shortly before leaving headquarters for the front lines. "Are you the kinema, Matt? You're the last person I expected to see out here, but seriously, are you really going to film the day?" "Yes," I replied. "Where do you propose to take it?" The general suggested Jacob's Ladder. "What?" came a startled chorus from about half a dozen other officers. "Take photos from Jacob's Ladder? Good lord, it's an absolute death trap." It certainly seems by the map to be an ideal place to get the mine going up and the advance going over no man's land. Granted, but well, it's your shoot. Will you let us introduce you to the doctor? You'll need him. With that ominous warning ringing in his ears, this note allowing free movement in his pocket, and weighed down with 70 pounds of filming equipment, he and his assistant began their journey to the front lines. After 3/4 of an hour's trudging and splashing, I reached the White City and turned down a trench called Tenderloin Street. About 100 yards on my right, at the junction of King Street and St Helena Street, my guide pointed out the brigade dugout. Depositing my camera and outfit close to some sandbags, I went inside and introduced myself. 4 officers were present. Malins explained to the group that he wanted to capture the preliminary bombardment on the enemy front lines. By following his account here on the map and the names of the trenches he passed through, we can plot his precise route. By my map, a spot called Lannox Street seems likely, I said. It's bang opposite the village and they are firing the 15-inch gun on the eastern corner. If you'd be good enough to guide me, I'll have a look now, as it will take some time to fix up my camera in reasonable safety. "You won't find much safety there," he replied. We proceeded by way of King Street to Lannox Street, and several times we had to fall flat in the trench bottom to escape being hit by shells. By zooming into the approximate view that Malins would have had from Lannox Street, just here, and looking through the rough cuts of his footage, we find these scenes, which when comparing the skyline and location of the village to the remastered original footage, provides a match. Here's Malins. I looked on the village, or rather what was the late site of it. It was absolutely flattened, with the exception of a few remaining stumps of trees which used to be a beautiful wood, near which the village nestled. As he began to turn the handle on his camera, we can show the actual footage that he took, along with hearing his own memories of that very moment. Our guns were simply pouring shells on the Boche. The first of the 15-inch came over and exploded with a deafening roar. The sight was stupefying. I began to expose my film, swinging the camera first on one side and then the other. Shell after shell came roaring over. One dropped on the remaining walls of a chateau, and when the smoke had cleared, there was absolutely nothing left. How in the world could anything live in such a maelstrom of explosive? It's difficult to conceive. Let's pause for a second. It's the detail here that's fascinating. Looking at this still, we can be certain about where this was taken and what it shows. Of course, we already know where Lannox Street was on the trench map, but here we see a few key features. First are the sandbags marking the British second line, above which Maylands has raised his tripod and camera just enough to get a view but without attracting enemy attention. Beyond that is the British barbed wire, identified by these corkscrew pickets, which were used to hold the wire in place. Then there's this lighter patch of ground, part of Jacob's Ladder, the frontline trench, and beyond that, no man's land, across the middle of which runs this line of trees. Hard to tell from here, but it's actually an area known as the Sunken Road, but more about this later. Beyond that, on the right hand side of the shot, we can just make out the tree-lined main road running into Beaumont-Hamel village, and then the approximate position of the enemy front line, some 430 yards away, followed by the remnants of what may be the church spire and then the shattered buildings of the rest of the village in the distance. Looking at this drone footage of the same general area, we can identify all of those points in the modern landscape. The British front line, which ran right here, the sunken road, the German front line, village church and buildings, meaning that Maylands was right about here, with the viewfinder on his Moyen-based 35mm camera offering approximately this field of vision. So, with the first shot in the can, Maylands packed up his gear and, despite several more hair-raising near misses from enemy shells, made it back to the brigade dugout. He recalled, "Another officer came in and I got him to show me round Jacob's Ladder. We went through King Street again and followed the trench until we arrived at the place. The formation of this point was extraordinary. I was on the bank of a small valley. Leading down from this position were about 25 steps, hence the name Jacob's Ladder. The position from a photographic point of view was admirable, and I doubt whether on any other part of our front such a suitable point could be found. Jove, I said, this is the ideal place. I'll definitely decide upon it." This is the same area today, with this tree-covered bank running across no man's land towards the German forward positions over here. Maylands had chosen Jacob's Ladder as it offered unobstructed views of the area from which the British would attack, and also this hill, a German strongpoint called the Hawthorne Redoubt, beneath which Maylands knew an enormous mine would detonate shortly before the attack was launched. But as he was to learn a short time later, the wait would go on. I went direct to brigade headquarters to get a full supply of film stock before going to the front line. A man I knew was there, looking for all the world like a man down and out. "What's up? Anything wrong?" "Yes, rather. The bloody day's postponed for 48 hours. Frustrated, but now with a little more time to gain extra footage before the big show, he set off back to the front lines, where he met another officer. "Well, what's the next move?" I was asked. "Trench mortars," I said. "Both flying pigs and plum puddings ought to make topping scenes." "Yes," the captain said. "They're in action this afternoon, and I'm in charge of the heavy trench mortars. I'll give you a good show. I only have one pit available, as Fritz dropped a crump in the other yesterday and blew the whole show to smithereens." Let's turn back to Maylands' actual footage of what he described, showing the loading and positioning of a British 2-inch trench mortar, known due to its distinctive shape as either a plum pudding or toffee apple, along with his own recollections of that scene. After clambering, crawling, running and jumping, we reached a hole in the ground, into which the head and shoulders of a man were just disappearing. I looked down, and in the depth of about 12 feet was a trench mortar. "Are you ready?" came a voice from above. "Right, sir," replied the sergeant. I began exposing my film. "Fire!" the trench mortar officer shouted down. Fire they did, and the concussion nearly knocked me head over heels. I was quite unprepared for such a backblast. Hurriedly leaving the first trench mortar pit, Maylands, according to his account, then dropped into a second, capturing this interesting footage, showing the crew of a 9.45-inch heavy mortar known as a flying pig, laboriously loading a mortar bomb, being careful not to strike the contact fuse, rotating it towards the pit exit, then setting the desired elevation before retreating to safety behind the camera and firing via a long lanyard, with the detonation throwing the bomb some 400 yards towards the enemy lines. His work complete, Malins returned behind the lines to brigade headquarters one more time for a good night's rest, and early the following morning made his way to the small village of Maille. There he would capture these scenes of Major General Beauvoir de Lisle, commander of the 29th Division, as he addressed the men whom the following day would lead the assault. Malins even adds voice to what of course at the time was silent film, by recalling in part what the general said. I want to tell you something of the situation as it now stands. You're probably aware that we are taking part in the greatest battle ever fought by British troops. Not only is it of far more importance than any fight since Waterloo, but the numbers engaged far exceed any assembly of troops in former days. The importance of winning a great victory is so great that nothing has been left undone to ensure success. But the higher commanders know, and I know, that all the best arrangements in the world cannot win battles. Battles are won by infantry, and it is to the battalions like yourself that we look to gain a great victory. Following that speech, the men and Malins set off one final time for the front lines, with of course Malins capturing the scenes, until eventually arriving here near the chalky banks of an area known as the White City, where Malins passed a few hours chatting with fellow officers and getting what little sleep he could as the night crept on. Around 5:30 AM. An officer entered. "Hello," he said. "Are you the movie man?" "Yes," I said, sitting up. "What's up?" "The colonel sent me to see if you would like to film a company of our men in occupation of the sunken road. They occupied it during the night without a single casualty, by tunnelling for about 50 yards through the parapet under no man's land, then sapped up into the road. It's a fine piece of work and will make a good picture." "I'll come. It will be splendid from the historical point of view." Well, easier said than done. As we can see from this view of the ground, that area known as the sunken road, sometimes called the sunken lane, was actually right here, bang in the middle of no man's land. As part of the planned attack, over 100 men of the leading battalion had snuck into it during the night, using a tunnel and sap which ran from the main line just here to about this location. And there they waited. Malins recalled a pretty traumatic journey to reach them. Bosch was fairly plastering the whole trench and smashing down our parapets in the most methodical manner. I bent low and rushed through traverse after traverse. The further I went, the worse it got. Shrieking, spitting shells seemed to envelop us. I looked back, the same. In front, another burst. The flames swept right into my face. If I'd been standing up, it would have killed me without a doubt. To go back was as dangerous as to advance, and to stay where I was, well, it was worse if anything. To tell the truth, I'd gone so far now that I did not like turning back. The picture of our men in the sunken road attracted me like a magnet. It's a good thing it did, as the scene he captured was perhaps the most iconic of the First World War. In it are men of the 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, less than 1 hour before launching their assault against the German lines only 190 yards away. Even today, a visit to this lane just seems to ooze history. It's somewhere I've been to dozens of times, and without fail, it's incredibly powerful. Here's Malins. Then I set my camera up and filmed the scene. I had to take every precaution in getting my machine in position, keeping it close to the bank, as a false step would have exposed the position to the Boche, who might have enfiladed the whole road from either flank. I filmed the waiting Fusiliers. Some of them looked happy and gay, others sat with stern, set faces, realising the great task in front of them. No doubt those men, many of whom were veterans of the Gallipoli campaign, were under no illusion as to what was to come when they advanced through that hedge, and maybe the appearance of a cameraman, likely the first they had ever seen, at that moment was a welcome distraction. Certainly, given what was to come, it's one of the defining scenes of the Great War in the Western Front. Around 6:30 AM, Malins left the sunken road and returned to the main line, arriving here just in time to capture scenes of the rest of the same battalion making final preparations to advance. Returning through King Street, I was just in time to film some of the men fixing bayonets before being sent to their respective stations in the firing trench. The great moment was drawing near. I admit I was feeling a wee bit nervous. The mental and nervous excitement under such conditions was very great. Everyone was in a state of suppressed excitement. On the way, I passed an officer I knew. "Are you going over?" I said. "Rather," he replied, "the whole lot of us. Some stunt, eh?" "Don't forget," I said, "the camera will be on you. Good luck." This scene is worth exploring a little. It's fascinating, but it's the little details that make it so. Things like this: tin triangles attached to the back of men's packs, ordered to be worn so that those observing the fight could identify friendly troops and report progress back to headquarters. Also, we see here a lieutenant wearing other ranks' webbing, which was not typical for an officer earlier in the war, who wore the more distinctive Sam Brown belt, but it shows that by now officers are learning to blend in with their men to avoid being targeted by snipers. Alongside him is Company Sergeant Major Nelson of C Company, identified by the rank insignia right here on his lower sleeve. We can identify this precise location by zooming in on these two trench signs, one of which indicates the direction of the firing line, whilst the other names the trench on the left as King Street. Knowing the layout of the trenches leads us to this junction right here between Tenderloin Street and King Street. Just a few minutes later, the men were assembled and ready. Malins too approached his prearranged post only to find that it had been flattened by shell fire, so he hastily moved a few yards to his right to set up his camera with this view across the battlefields. Now let's wind the clock back and pick up with Malins as he awaited the explosion of a £40,000 mine charge at 7:20 AM. Heavens, how the minutes dragged. It seemed like a lifetime waiting there. My nerves were strung up to high pitch, my heart was thumping like a steam hammer. I gave a quick glance at an officer close by. He was mopping the perspiration from his brow and clutching his stick, first in one hand, then in the other, quite unconsciously, I'm sure. He looked at his watch. Another 3 minutes went by. Would nothing ever happen? Then, the ground where I stood gave a mighty convulsion. It rocked and swayed. I gripped hold of my tripod to steady myself. Then, for all the world, like a gigantic sponge, the earth rose in the air to a height of hundreds of feet. Higher and higher it rose, and with a horrible, grinding roar, the earth fell back upon itself, leaving in its place a mountain of smoke. The earth was down. I swung my camera round to our own parapets. The engineers were swarming over the top and streaming along the skyline. I continued to turn the handle of my camera, viewing the whole attack through my viewfinder, first swinging one way and then the other. That footage, unique at the time as perhaps the very first true combat footage in history, deserves a little exploration. Remembering that mine went off at 7:20 AM, not 7:30 when the general advance began. And so what Malins actually films after the mine is not the first wave, but the advance party of Royal Engineers whose task was to race towards and capture the crater before the stunned Germans could recover and reclaim it. That same view is absolutely identifiable today. We can see here the main road leading to Beaumont-Hamel, only 100 yards away, on the other side of which, advancing from right to left on the slope, are a number of soldiers, with more visible on the skyline just here. The German defenders, off screen to the left, were at this very moment opening fire, with these men falling in the next seconds as bullets whipped low across the field. After what must have felt like an eternity, but in reality only a handful of minutes later, whistles blew and those in the main line began their advance, as Malins recalled, again with the moment captured on film. Then another signal rang out, and from the trenches immediately in front of me, our wonderful troops went over the top. What a picture it was. Still more went over, and still a stream of men were making for the mine crater. Then they disappeared in the smoke. The noise was terrific. It was as if the earth were lifting bodily and crashing against some immovable object. The very heavens seemed to be falling. Thousands of things were happening at the same moment. The mind could not begin to grasp the barest margin of it. Lieutenant Geoffrey Malins, from this very spot on the 1st of July 1916, though he didn't know it, was witnessing the deadliest morning in the modern history of the British Army. Just a few hundred yards away to his left, those men he'd filmed in the sunken road had also advanced, directly into heavy machine gun fire, and the result was nothing less than catastrophic. In fact, for miles to north and south, the same tragic scenes unfolded as thousands upon thousands of men were shattered by artillery or riddled by machine gun bullets. Malin's own short entry offers a small glimpse of that moment. The general said this was the hardest part of the line to get through, and my word, it seems like it, to look at our poor lads. I could see them strewn all over the ground, swept down by the accursed machine gun fire. Despite those utterly horrific opening minutes, Malin's filmed on, capturing these powerful scenes as men braved enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades trapped in no man's land. We stood with bated breath. Would they reach him? Yes, at last. Then hastily binding up the injured man's wounds, they picked him up between them and with a run made for our parapet. The swine of a German blazed away at them with his machine gun, but marvellous to relate, neither of them were touched. I filmed the rescue from start to finish until they passed me in the trench, a mass of perspiration. Upon the back of one was the unconscious man he'd rescued, but 20 minutes after these two had gone through hell to rescue him, the poor fellow died. Malin stayed in the same area for a while longer, capturing the brutal aftermath of a failed attack as wounded men, some limping, some on stretchers, some being carried, made their way back to some kind of safety. Towards the end of that afternoon, an exhausted Geoffrey Malins, along with a ragtag bunch of survivors of the 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, assembled here at the White City, where hundreds of smiling men had been filmed just a few hours earlier. I realised that the roll call was about to take place. I filmed them as they staggered toward and dropped down utterly worn out, body and soul. By an almost superhuman effort, many of them staggered to their feet again and formed themselves into an irregular line. In one little space were just 2 thin lines, all that was left of a glorious regiment, barely 100 men. I filmed the scene as it unfolded itself. The sergeant stood there with a notebook resting on the end of his rifle, repeatedly putting his pencil through names that were missing. And so ended, at least for Malins, the opening day of the Battle of the Somme. Of course, the fight would go on, and Malins, along with cinematographer John McDowell, would continue to film until the 9th of July. The following day, with a total of 8,000 feet of film, he and editor Charles Urban set to work, creating The Battle of the Somme, a 77-minute silent feature film. Premiering in London on the 10th of August 1916, whilst the battle still raged, it was an immediate sensation, with families queuing for hours to watch in hopes of spotting a loved one. In its first 6 weeks in Britain alone, it's estimated that a staggering 20 million people, half of the UK's entire population, attended a screening, making it, even to this day, one of the most watched films in British cinematic history. Of course, though, those protagonists were not acting, and many of those featured would never get to see it. And today, thousands upon thousands of soldiers who went to the Somme in 1916 and never returned lie in beautifully maintained cemeteries across these now peaceful battlefields that still mark the site of the old front lines. Thanks for watching. This was a difficult video to make, but one that we're proud to share and hope you found interesting. If you'd like to know more about trench life and the First World War generally, why not check out our podcast, Not So Quiet on the Western Front, where each week I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Spencer Jones, to explore famous episodes from throughout the conflict. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.